Hi, and welcome to Berry Aftercare. I'm super glad you're joining me today, and I thank you because I appreciate you taking your time to spend it with me. Today on Berry Aftercare, I'm going to be talking about self esteem, your identity, and behavior, and how those things are correlated. And specifically, of course, we're going to be talking about your behavior as it relates to your weight loss and as it relates to your maintaining that weight loss and living an overall healthy bariatric care lifestyle. So I'm going to start by asking you some questions. And I want you just to think in your mind, all right? The question is, what would you guess is the level of self-esteem in the following scenarios? Now, it could be high, medium, low, however you want to gauge it, if you use a number system, whatever. But what would you guess is the level of self-esteem for for a person who starves themselves, literally has anorexia, to the point that they are dangerously close to causing body damage, body system damage. So they're starving themselves. They're in dire need of help because they're about to have some major system failure. What would you guess is the level of self esteem for someone whose behavior is what I just described? What would you guess the level of self esteem for a person whose behavior is such that they get drunk, let's say 5 nights a week? How about the level of self esteem for a person who abuses prescription pain medication on a regular basis? How good do you think they feel about themselves just based on that behavior? What about a person who completes a master's degree and then goes on to complete a PhD program? What would you guess is the level of self esteem based on that behavior? What would you guess is the level of self esteem of a person who has built a truly happy 40-year marriage, given all the ups and downs that a regular marriage has? But after 40 years, they're content and they are happy with each other. What would you guess is the level of self esteem of that person? Lastly, what would you guess is the level of self esteem the person recording this video? That would be me. Now, let me say, all of these scenarios, all of these questions are about my life, right? And there's a projection or a direction, an increase in self esteem over the years, right? When I went off to college, man, I starved myself. That's indicative, that kind of behavior or any sort of eating behavior is not indicative of a person who feels really good about themselves. I did get drunk probably 5 nights a week through the last couple of years of my college career. That's not indicative of a person who feels real good about herself. I abused prescription pain medication after I pretty much quit drinking. That's not indicative of a person who feels very good about themselves because what I was doing was masking, hiding from my reality in life. I didn't like myself very much, and I was trying to escape myself and my situations. I was trying to numb myself through these various uses of substances, alcohol, and medication, right? Well, the next question was kind of a trick one, although I did complete both a master's and a PhD program after I went through a treatment program. That does not alone indicate a person who has high self esteem. People can complete all kinds of degrees and really have low self esteem because what they're trying to do is compensate with a degree or several degrees or a high title in a job or whatever, the fact that they feel really low about themselves. However, in my case, this was a time after I had gone through treatment, stopped using all of those substances to numb myself and hide from my life, and I had been through at least 4 years of therapy. So, in those 4 years of therapy and changing my behaviors to those of a healthier human being and learning the skills, I was ill equipped. I didn't know the skills for feeling good about yourself, for engaging in healthy behavior. I knew what had been modeled for me, and I knew how I was feeling about myself at that time in my life. So as I went through those 4 years of therapy and began engaging in a healthier lifestyle, my self-esteem increased and improved. Throughout the 40 years of my marriage, my self-esteem has improved. As my husband and I worked through all the struggles that are inherent in a relationship, and as we began capable through learning the skills of having healthier discussions, healthier arguments, working through things in less of a self centered way. My self esteem improved. The person who's recording the video today, my self esteem is much higher than it was when I started college at the age of 18. It's been a consistent development. I've had to increase my self-esteem over the years, and I'll tell you how that's happened, and it's the same way that you can increase your self-esteem if by chance it's suffering at all. So here are the highlights that we're going to cover tonight. One of the things that I'll cover is the research. It's been shown through research that disordered eating, and we'll talk about what that is, as well as meeting the criteria for having the disease of obesity, are correlated with self-esteem. And if you're wondering, they're negatively correlated. So people who engage in disordered eating or who have the disease of obesity oftentimes suffer from lower self-esteem. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? This is the second thing we'll cover. Does low self-esteem result in unhealthy eating or drinking or prescription pain medication or anorexia? Or does unhealthy eating or too much drinking or too much of any unhealthy behavior lead to low self-esteem? Thirdly, oh, my dog's having a little fit over there. Darla, lay down. Thirdly, which do you focus on first? Do you focus on improving your self-esteem or changing your eating behaviors? Good question, right? And finally, what are some tips for improving your self-esteem? All right, so let's start with that first point. That research has clearly shown that disordered eating, as well as meeting the criteria for having the disease of obesity, are correlated with having lower self esteem. I don't think that probably comes as a surprise to anybody who has engaged in those behaviors or has suffered from the disease of obesity. But let's talk about what the signs of disordered eating are, according to the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, because sometimes people think of eating disorders, which are identified through the American Psychological and the American Psychiatric Associations according to a certain set of criteria. So, eating disorders are anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, those specific kinds of criteria. But disordered eating, I would also say that eating disorders include disordered eating. But here are some signs and symptoms of disordered eating. And these are part of a list, they're not inclusive. So this isn't a limited list. But here's some behaviors to indicate disordered eating. Frequent dieting. Oh my goodness, how many of you have been frequent dieters? Oh, all of you? Having anxiety associated with specific foods or skipping meals. Chronic weight fluctuations. I think I'm talking to the right audience, just guessing. Having rigid rituals and routines about food and exercise. That could include that all or nothing thinking, right? I'm all in or I'm all out. Feelings of guilt or shame associated with eating. Preoccupation with food, weight, and body image that negatively impact quality of life. This was so me for so many years, right? Also, a feeling of loss of control around food and compulsive eating habits. Using exercise, food restriction, fasting, or purging to make up for the bad foods that you may have consumed. So that's a partial list of what describes disordered eating, which I have engaged in for a good part of my life. So I'm not just talking to you guys, I'm looking in the mirror as I talk about these things myself. But here are some of the harms that are caused by disordered eating. A lot of times people minimize or don't realize the impact that disordered eating has on your mental and physical health. We minimize the risks. We say, I'm fine. We say, I'm not losing too much weight, or I haven't had any major health problems. But it doesn't mean that engaging in this disordered eating behavior isn't wreaking havoc on how we feel about ourselves and our mood, which affects other people in our lives too, right? Other detrimental behaviors caused by disordered eating can include greater risk of obesity, greater risk of eating disorders, bone loss, GI problems, electrolyte and fluid imbalances, low heart rate, blood pressure problems, increased anxiety, depression, social isolation. Those are big deals. We cannot minimize the connection between disordered eating and these subsequent or related kinds of issues that absolutely, without a doubt, affect our daily routines and sadly affect those with whom we are closest, most specifically, the people in our own homes. So, disordered eating is really, really a serious health concern. It's not just like, oh, gee, golly, I got a little bit of disordered eating. No, it can be really difficult to detect since a person may not display all of those classic symptoms. They may not even be overweight. You can have very disordered eating and not be able to see it by the size of a person's body. So it's really important to remember that even if a person who's exhibiting disordered eating habits and behaviors, they maybe it's likely that they're experiencing some concurrent at the same time emotional and mental distress as well as whatever physical issues this disordered eating is causing. So that's kind of a definition of disordered eating. Now, what the point here was that disordered eating and self-esteem are negatively correlated, right? So let's talk about what it might look like if you're a person who has low self-esteem. A person with low self-esteem doesn't really feel confident in a lot of their abilities, or they minimize how good they actually are because they're downplaying the goodness about them. People with low self-esteem regularly compare themselves to others, but it's always in a negative way. You never feel like you're doing better than somebody else. We're comparing ourselves in negative ways and feel really triggered when you make even the smallest mistake. There's oftentimes some perfectionism that's thrown in there. You're very resistant or easily triggered by any kind of criticism. Even if it's a suggestion, you're really sensitive to that kind of thing. And people with low self-esteem focus on their failures. They ignore their accomplishments and they downplay those. A lot of times, low self-esteem is indicated by a lot of anxiety or depression or constant worry about everything that you do. So people who have disordered eating, which we described, often also have lower self esteem, which we just described. So, which came first, the low self esteem or the disordered eating? That's a good question. Well, here's the deal. Here's what research tells us. It is clear that each of the predictor variables, meaning what they're talking about in this research, is self esteem, perfectionism, some were some of the variables they were checking. But it is clear that self esteem is inextricably intertwined as to how and what extent they predict disordered eating. The implications of this research are very telling. Self esteem does indeed contribute to certain eating pathologies and thus the status of one's health. So, what that's saying is low self esteem absolutely contributes to unhealthy eating. Absolutely. Another research says overall, the present results suggest that self esteem and fear of negative appearance a lot of us suffer from that too, right? Play a significant role in the association between weight, self stigma, criticizing yourself about your weight, and disordered eating in obese women. So they're saying that absolutely self esteem is part of the low self esteem is part of the overall picture for those who struggle with obesity, particularly women. But I would say it crosses the line there. So I think the answer is it's a two-way street. Low self esteem leads to not just disordered eating, but also, hello, did you hear me identify myself at the beginning? I was anorexic. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm a recovering person, a drug addict. I'm a, I'm a recovering perfectionist. All of these things that people with low self esteem do. And it could be some or all of these, right? I just switched from one unhealthy behavior to another. But disordered eating is absolutely correlated with low self esteem. And if you ask anybody who struggled with the disease of obesity, I would say that nearly all of them, or the vast majority, is going to say that carrying a great deal of extra weight absolutely affects your self-esteem, and not in a good way. I don't know, Darla, lay down. I don't know many people who carry a lot of extra weight who say it's made them feel good about themselves. So I think what came first, the chicken or egg? I think they just interplay with each other. But there is research that says, obviously, it goes both ways. Now, one of my favorite authors, James Clear, he says, your current behaviors are simply a reflection of your current identity. Let me read that again. Your current behaviors, let's talk about eating behaviors in this case, and he gives examples of weight in this. Your current behaviors, your eating behaviors, your exercise behaviors, how you treat your body, are simply a reflection of your current identity. Sorry, gotta let the dog out. What you do now at this time in your life, all right? This is James Clear still. What you do, how you behave, is a mirror image of the type of person you believe you are. And that may be a conscious identification or a subconscious identification. But that's in line with what the research says. Our behavior is kind of a giveaway to how we feel about ourselves. So when I was drinking to excess, it's kind of an indication that that girl doesn't feel too good about herself. Starving myself to the point of anorexia and near body damage, system failure, is clearly an indication that I didn't feel very worthwhile of treating myself in a healthy behavior. Overeating to the point where your health and your weight and your relationships are negatively impacted. I hate to say this, but for the vast majority of people, has some correlation with how you feel about yourself. And that's not to say you feel absolutely horrible about yourself. There are many areas of your life where you probably feel really good about yourself. But there's a correlation there to some degree. And I'm not even going to try to guess what that is for you. And I wouldn't encourage you to do that either. What I would encourage you to do is work on developing healthier behaviors and improving your self esteem. So that leads to the question, what are you focused on first? Do you improve your self esteem or change your eating behaviors and your exercise behaviors? Well, remember how they said it's inextricably linked, self esteem and behaviors? So that means do them both at the same time. I call that a parallel process. I'm going to work on both my self esteem, increasing my self esteem, and I'm going to improve my behaviors. And as I improve my behaviors, my self esteem will rise. And as my self esteem rises, my behaviors are likely to improve at the same time. They go lockstep, these things work together. So don't worry about, oh my gosh, I have to have my mental health in tip top shape before I'm laughing because I remember. I'm just going to share this little thing with you, Darla. Please stop making noise with those toys. I'm sorry, my dog is interfering today, but she is. And so we just go with the flow, right? Because life is reality. We deal with what's going on in life. I'm going to tell you this funny story. So, one of my good friends, who's actually had weight loss surgery, by the way, and is doing very, very well like 10 years later, she has a little boy, and he's always called me Aunt Connie ever since he was born. And he was at our house one time, and they live in another state, and we were in Georgia. So they were visiting. And he's like 5 or 6 years old. And he comes in, and we're hanging out one day, and he goes, Aunt Connie, you're in tip top shape. I thought that was so dang cute coming from that little guy. Anywho, if you want to be in tip top shape, you got to have the behaviors that go with that. And by the way, I would certainly not have considered myself to be in tip top shape. But if a 6 year old wants to think that, you go, buddy. All right. But think about increasing them both at the same time. So, what are some tips for improving your self esteem? Well, one of the things to improve your self esteem, especially when we're talking about weight loss, we're talking about maintaining weight loss, we're talking about having a healthy post operative lifestyle, because your lifestyle is all of your life. But we're going to focus on, it can be behaviors related to your eating, your exercise, your treatment of other people, how you react at work. It could be all these areas. But I will tell you that when you behave in ways that are consistent with your personal values, your self esteem will improve because you've just had a win. So, for example, when I talk to my husband, which I do now 90% of the time versus 10% of the time 40 years ago, and I respond to him with a calmness and a kindness and a curiosity and a desire to understand his perspective, not just have him understand mine, right? So when I'm patient and kind and loving, I feel good about myself versus when I would scream and holler and be negative and just not a very nice person to be married to, I'm sure. And I didn't feel very good about myself to begin with. And then I felt worse about myself because of the icky behavior. So every time I engage in a behavior that's consistent with my value of being a kind, compassionate, somewhat patient human being, then I feel better about myself. So let's talk about the behaviors that I call the gotta do ums, right? When you lose weight and you want to keep that weight off, there are some behaviors you just got to do, whether you like them or not. You know what I'm talking about. Choosing healthy foods, having healthy portion sizes, limiting the processed foods, drinking a lot of water, staying away from a lot of extra sugar, making sure you get enough sleep, making sure you get some exercise, making sure that you meal prep if that works for you, making sure you have accountability and a really good support group. Those are behaviors that research is very clear about when it comes to you got to do these things if you want to maintain your healthy weight. So we're talking about anytime you engage in the gotta do ums, even if it's two or three more today than you did 5 weeks ago, that's a win. And every time you complete a healthy behavior, celebrating the fact that you did that is also going to increase your self esteem. So, one of the best tips for increasing your self esteem and sustaining your weight loss is to follow through with the behaviors that your bariatric professional team have encouraged you to do. So, eating at whatever food interval they told you to eat at, snacking if they told you to snack, not snacking if they told you not to snack, and be very conscientious of what kinds of foods you put in your mouth. As a bariatric patient, there is no, you don't have to eliminate any kind of food groups. You need to be mindful of the quantities of which you put the different food groups into your mouth. But that is between you and your bariatric dietitian. But you can copy a list of the gotta do's from my website, which is just ConnieStapletonPhD.com, and print the list of those. And every time you do one of the gotta do's or a healthy behavior, check it off. Give yourself that gold star, celebrate internally, and you've just increased your self-esteem by a little bit. And that's how we do it. So, some other ways to boost your self esteem is to remember that not only does healthy behavior increase your self-esteem, but it builds motivation. So when you do something, not only are you increasing your self-esteem, but you're increasing your motivation to do it again because you like the way it feels and you like the feeling of being proud of yourself. So some other ways, and I love this, back to James, oh my goodness, dog. Back to James Clear and what he was talking about a minute ago, which was your current behaviors are a reflection of your current identity and the person that you believe you are. So he says to have identity based habits, which means I'm building habits based on my identity. Then you need to think about yourself in terms of the identity you want to be. So in other words, I'm going to become the type of person who moves more every day. And this is a specific example from James Clear. So I am choosing to be, so I'm identifying myself as a person who moves more every day. That's my identity. And so my behavior then, I'm going to get small wins. I'm going to get small wins. Maybe I get a tracking device of my movement. Maybe I walk for 10 minutes and I write that down. It's a small win. It doesn't have to be. I identify as the type of person who moves more. So tomorrow I'm going to run a 10K. That's not going to happen. So you build this identity based habits first by identifying the kind of person you want to be. I want to be a person who eats protein first before I eat anything else. Hello, that's a bariatric kind of thing, right? I want to be a person who limits my intake of any processed food. I want to be a person who responds kindly to other people. So use this in all areas of your life. But he says, identify who you want to be and then do little things to become that person. So you're developing little habits that are wonderful habits that increase your likelihood of being that person, a healthy person, a person who responds kindly and compassionately, and you're improving your self esteem. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool. But I'm going to give you some other ways to increase your self esteem. And these I got from a list from Mayo Clinic. You can look up your own, do a Google search. How to increase my self esteem, right? Take some of the responsibility for yourself and learn and read and listen to podcasts and do the things, right? Okay. So what they've posted are based on cognitive behavioral therapy, and they really hone in on, as does pretty much anything you're going to find on the internet, is how we change our self-esteem is by changing our self-talk, changing the way we talk to ourselves and changing the way we think. So become aware of your thoughts. Are you a negative Nelly? Are you beating yourself up all the time? Are you expecting the worst and therefore you get the worst? Do you talk yourself out of things? Do you interpret what other people say to you in the worst possible way? Check out your thinking because it may be stinking. You may have the stinking thinking going on, and not just about, I'm sorry, not just about the things you say to yourself and think to yourself, which is really critical to change, but also the way you're interpreting other people's treatment towards you. So be careful of all or nothing thinking. I'm going to I'm going to eat healthy every single day or not at all. The first time you fall off the wagon, you're out of the game. No, 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 no. Be careful of that. That is not going to lead to success. All or nothing thinking is very dangerous in terms of setting yourself up for a healthier life and improved self esteem. So, mental filtering. Do you focus and dwell on the negatives? If you do, you're going to have to convert that kind of thinking into something more uplifting, something more positive, right? Sometimes we dwell on the negative because it's easier than challenging ourselves to look at it better. And here's another thing, and I focus on this a lot. We don't like to put up with that crap from kids, right? We encourage them, we tell them to do this. Do you have to we teach them, but we have to do what we're encouraging them to do also. Are you a person who jumps to negative conclusions? Like, oh, they didn't respond to my text. I must have done something to really hurt their feelings or make them mad or, you know, push them away. That's not healthy thinking. Don't make assumptions and don't try to read other people's minds, right? Don't mistake facts for feelings or feelings for facts. Facts are not feelings, right? So maybe you're feeling like a failure. I feel like a failure. That doesn't make it a fact. And this kind of negative stinking thinking is really going to get you in trouble. And so I talk about the four aces all the time. Become aware of what you're doing and then put forth effort to change that. Try using hopeful statements. It's like, geez, even though this exercise thing is not my cup of tea and it's tough, I can do this. Yeah, I'm not a breakfast eater, but you know what? I can manage a protein shake in the morning. So use something more hopeful. Keep away from those naughty words like should and must. As they say in the recovery world, don't shit on yourself. Right? Because when you should on yourself, it's like a demand. It's easy to put yourself down. I must do this. No, I'm going to put effort into that and I'll feel good about that. Right? So avoid the should and the must. Focus on the positive. Think about what you've learned when you go off the rails and don't think you're not going to go off the rails with food because you will. Try to learn from it. Decide what you've learned and how you're going to implement that the next time. Stay away from other negative Nellies. Stay away from people who bring you down. Don't listen to their crap. Learn to set boundaries. Learn to say no. That will help you to feel better. Celebrate your success. Celebrate, 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 even the smallest thing. Because people are so used to beating themselves up emotionally. Now I got a jet plane flying overhead. I hope you can't hear that. But celebrate your successes because they do encourage us to do that healthy behavior again, and they do help us raise our self esteem and learn to accept compliments. A simple thank you is accepting a compliment. Um, Avoid comparisons. Really important because you're only going to put yourself at the lower end of that thing, right? And focus on positive people and positive situations. So, what do you want to take away today? Understand that self esteem and disordered eating, which, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have engaged in, right? I'm not judging. I've been there myself, right? So, probably most of us, regardless, can stand to increase our self esteem and maybe our behaviors, right? Um, so remember that you can increase your self esteem through behaviors, through self talk, and by looking up online other ways to do that. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. At this point, we're wanting to increase our self esteem. We're wanting to increase our healthy lifestyle and our healthy behaviors. So who cares? You don't need to. You don't need to do that. Except sometimes it's really, really helpful to look at where did this low self esteem originate? It didn't originate with you. It likely came from comments and ideals set upon you from parents, society, et cetera, et cetera. So, in that regard, it is good to look at it and just try to clean out that emotional closet and get rid of those kinds of messages that you have internalized and now dump upon yourself. So which came first doesn't matter. Which do you focus on first? Increasing your self-esteem or your behaviors? The answer is yes. You work on both of them simultaneously, and there are all kinds of ways to work on improving your self-esteem. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to invite somebody else to listen to this, somebody you think could benefit from this information, and then I want you to physically make a list of the ways you intend to work on increasing your self esteem. I don't care if it's one, two, or three, or 25, but work on ways that list ways you intend to increase your self esteem and your behavior. So I would start with, I'm a little prejudiced here, but download the Gotta Do 'em list. And then pick 2 other things that maybe we talked about in today's topic, or get online and look them up yourself and find some that really seems to match who you are. So I look forward to seeing you as part of the entire Berry Aftercare program, which does include the podcast, but several other videos every week. A lot of great information to help you develop a healthy Berry Aftercare life and improve your overall lifestyle. So, where do you join Berry Aftercare? www.barryaftercare.com. BARI aftercare, all one word.com. All right. Thank you for spending your time with me, and we will talk again soon. I appreciate you. Bye bye.